my camera, which is my camera, it'll cut out. So, hey, here we go. We're doing it. This is episode 3 of the Cathode Raid podcast. My name is Louis Zezeran, and I have with me Steve from RetroTech. How you doing, mate?
Great. Glad to be here today. Episode 3. Can't believe it already. So, ready to talk about some cathode stuff.
How do you feel so far about the reaction and what we're doing with the podcast? What are your feelings?
I've been really, surprised with a lot of that. It's already gotten some people good feedback. Everything that I've heard so far is that people that want to see it are really enjoying it. And I think that the idea of questions, I think that will take off more and more. I always get a lot of questions, not even on the podcast videos, but in general. So I think if people realize that they'll get, if they realize that the question thing's big, because it's hard to give some of these answers just in the form of text response in a box, so that's all good. I think people are really excited about that.
Yeah, because it's like for you, like, hey, Steve, what are the questions? Oh, I blow a fuse in this TV. What could it be? Well, give 10 minutes. I'm sure you could poke around and get something, but it's very hard to remotely diagnose. And it's another thing, actually, it's on our list of topics to have is what are the, top 5 things that someone can do if they need to communicate with you and diagnose, or like what are the 5 bits of information they can check this, check that, ask me a question. I'd love that, but tell me these 5 things first, and that might maybe give me some context. But another episode.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. There's always, because it always does seem like, and that's kind of something that I'd eventually like to develop. Would be nice. Is almost a flow chart of if this happens, then did you look at this? And then if you looked at this, did it go to this or this? And then it's like, okay, because those could, I remember those in old school service manuals or things. They were quite helpful, but there are some definite things where you could, at least point in the right direction a little bit.
All right, so let's start by recapping what we've been doing this week. I know we'll go with your stuff because I know you've been working. You had a couple of days straight. Were you working on a bunch of monitors, weren't you?
Yeah, all weekend it was pretty much a cram fest of CRTs. I've had a delivery that I went and picked up from New York about 2 or 3 months ago now, maybe 2 months, and it was 6 monitors from one person. I also delivered them a monitor that they had bought, and I had been finally where I was like, well, I need to get a lot of these done, so I worked through 4 of those this weekend. It was a PVM, 2 PVMs, Sony. They were an 8-inch 8041Q.
Oh, an 8-inch, nice.
Yeah, and then a 1341, which is the older. It's like the same era, like the medical monitor I got with the fuse blown out, where there's no service menu, just like the 8 series there. Both of those were early 90s models, I believe, and then I had 2 Panasonics, which I was really happy to work on. They were both 13 inches. One was a BTH 1350Y, which is surprised I could remember that. But that's actually an all analog version of. It was made by Panasonic, and it's very similar to that 1341 kind of. Although it's really nice because it adds component support. And then there was the final one was a 1390, and that was actually made by JVC. I opened it up, and it's all JVC parts inside, except for the tube is a Panasonic tube.
Branded Panasonic, okay. But
yes, it's branded Panasonic. But this one is really cool because it's like BVM quality. So it's got a full on-screen menu, and it accepts. It doesn't have cards in the back, but it has all the inputs you need in it, and it's only analog, but it has like 750 TV lines, so it's right in there where that 800 line Trinitron tube is. It's really high res. It looks awesome. I'm going to try to film some stuff on those 2 Panasonics just because I don't see them very often, and there really are great options.
I haven't seen much on Panasonics at all. So what were the overall, was it just general recaps?
Okay,
and preventive maintenance, or what sort of problems did you have with them?
The 2 Panasonics were just dirty and needed adjustment and cleaning, and so literally there's a process that takes me about an average about 2 hours and it's just a detail cleaning of the monitor and then readjusting and poking around and checking everything. And so that generally takes about 2 hours. And then
would that be to the extent of pulling out the whole tube out of the plastic? Is it
no,
that
not that. No, that would take more time. This is more or less. There's a lot of time testing, inspecting boards, where I have to take the boards and physically look at all the components and like check solder work, and it's just time consuming. And then at the same time, I'm cleaning them too. So it's not. But I do not. That's not like that. That would not be part of it unless there was a need for it, where the tube is just filthy and the case is filthy. See, on the Pro monitors, you can still get in there and, I can still wash the back case and the boards clean, and then I can clean around the monitor, which I do, the tube on all sides without actually taking it out of the bezel most of the time, but not sometimes, but not this time it didn't include. What it was funny was the 8-inch one had been serviced before because I could tell that some cap work had been done. But again, it was a shoddy job because there's one capacitor on there that it was rated at 25 volt 1000 microfarad, so it's a pretty decent sized capacitor. It's not one of the tiny ones. And the tech replaced it with a 50 volt 1000, which when you're talking about that size, it's going to perform fine, but it's 50 volts, so it's bigger. And this is a very tight little spot, so I got in there, and the darn thing is sticking up above the board. It's got its legs like this high above the board, just waiting again to ground out against something. So I removed that and replaced it with a better, smaller, correct one.
So a lot of that, I mean, that's a common story. You told me this sort of scenario before where one of the first things, it's just a visual look. Do any of these caps look out of place? Oh, right. Yeah. Now something's happened. There's a deeper story here.
Right. So yeah, my general process for this is to first, get the monitor, test it, see what conditions to begin with, and then before I get too involved with adjusting anything, I have to open up the shell after I know it's working, and that's when I do. You get the first visual inspection. Is it clean right away, or is it just filthy? So sometimes they need like an hour and a half of cleaning because they're covered in soot and nasty stuff. So then, once you do that, you can get under there, and then finally, you can go through and visually inspect stuff or use tools like meters, multimeters. Just general multimeter can be used to test a lot of things.
And you're poking around at things like you might... you just open any monitor. It's not like you've specifically seen that, but common things to look at, common places to poke around and look for continuity and so forth.
Right. There's definite. Well, if it doesn't have any issues, then you're just looking in there to make sure that nothing looks really out of place, or sometimes there will be signs of things that need to be replaced coming up. It's preventative maintenance. So you may just go in and say, okay, we're going to clean this. We're going to replace this cap kit. We're not doing all the monitor. We're doing this cap kit. And then we'll just go through and do that. And those are obviously the easiest jobs, right? Where it's just standard. I had one that I did from another load before I did these four. It was a 14 M2U. And honestly, I opened it up, and it was the cleanest I'd ever seen inside of it. It was from 2000, I believe, and it was spotless. I mean, spotless for a PVM. Like I couldn't. It was like it'd been saved in a bag because there was no dust in it.
No dust at all.
No dust at all. And it was one of the most. So you get into that, and you're like, okay, well, that's obviously beyond just spraying it off with some air, taking out and inspecting anything. There's really nothing to look at. But it was a perfect example of how one can be just clean after 20 years. And then the other ones would be like, it would be like have 10 monitors worth of dirt inside one of them. So it's hard to tell without opening them and looking. Mm-hmm. But then, you're going to look at it. Then you can start to try to think about if you have issues. I have a really good troubleshooting short video coming soon that is about a 2530 that I worked on, where the thing kept cutting out power, and
power gets tricky.
So, and the problem is this voltage is running all through the monitor, all over the place, and So I figured it out by wiggling a wire. Like I finally got to this wire and I'm wiggling it, and as I'm wiggling it, the power will go on, and then if I pull it, the power comes on. Blum, 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 blum. And it's, so it's just a little connection point on a board that wire goes to. I look at it, and you could see rings where it's just got cold solder joints. So I'm like, well, reflow the
you've
solder.
got to identify that. I mean,
but it takes you, how many hours does it take you to find that spot? Because you got to let it sit there and try to turn off, and it's like intermittent power loss, so you don't really know. Well, I had to let it run for 30 minutes before it would cut off on the first time. So, anyway, that was
we're all for
that was all
preventive maintenance that you did on the weekend. Or
no. The 2530 was brought to me because it was like, hey, this power's gone out. It kept going out. I don't know what's going on with it. So I knew that the power was going out, and that thing's a mess. Unfortunately, I mean, I have to go through. I've already rebuilt. I've rebuilt 3 of the boards. It has like 8 boards inside of it. And so I've already
rebuilt, you're meaning recap, taking
yes,
the
yes. And actually, this one was from the 80s, right? It's from like the late 80s. It's 2530, so it's big. And if you open those up, they have 2 deflection boards. They have 2 power supplies. They have an input board, a neck board, a color processing board, and a audio amp board in there. So there's like 9 or 10 boards almost total in this thing. And then there's a couple of switching boards on the bottom and junction boards. So this thing is filled with boards, and every single one of the boards, like I was like, okay, all these boards need rebuilding except the color board. But then the color board was the one that I'd fix everything else, and the color board kept going out. So I'm like, well, now I have to replace the color boards. And so what I'd had to do is I had a parts graveyard, and so I had a good tested color board. I just said, forget it, I'm done messing with that one, and I just replaced it. I replaced the input board where the inputs go in, because this had some crazy custom, like, sometimes you look into these PVMs and they'll have where somebody's removed a part and added like a resistor and all these weird, especially the older ones, bodged in there. I don't know whether they're done in the factory most of the time, I think, to like attenuate a signal that's not quite right. So they had all these things and all this corrosion, and I could visibly see bad caps on it. I'm like, I'm not even messing with this one. It's got corrosion all over half of it. So I said, you need to replace this one too. So I've done those 2. I did the second deflection board, the power supplies, and the neck board. I've still got the big deflection board to go, but it's like 120 caps. It's just all of it, and it's like, sometimes I get into it and I'm like, man, were we too greedy on this one? It's just like, eventually if you get into something, start working on it, it just starts not working because something else goes wrong while you're working on something. And that's why every board sometimes has to be reworked, and it's kind of a nightmare. Which is
difficult in these, as I said, 80s. These are older than regular. So what's that? Nigh on 35 years old or something like that?
Yes, this one is. This one is from 87. So yeah, I mean it's like it's never been serviced. It's a big one, never been serviced. So yeah, you're right on where you're like, God, I mean, I don't really want to recap this and send it on, but again, it's like, how long will it really last? It's already double the life expectancy on some of these capacitors, at least by the book. So there's always that, but yeah, that one.
It's just going to happen. I mean, I'm very used to, we have old stuff. We have old electronics. It's going to, like, I get frustrated, like all of us in the retro gaming community. And I'm sure we turn on that console, that device, that thing, and it's like, it worked yesterday and now it doesn't work. Oh, but you breathe. Remember, that's the hobby. That's all our profession. That's part of it. This is old electronics.
Just as an example, when I was working on that 2530, I was using my Super Nintendo to test it, right, and test the inputs, just my regular Super Nintendo, and all of a sudden my Super Nintendo stops working. I look down and something's up with the power supply where it's like wiggling free from the it's an old original power supply. It's the wires wiggling free from the actual brick on it, and it's like, so it's intermittent power loss on it, and I'm like, goodness gracious, and I got to go find. So it's like, it's always something. You're like, I've got this thing, I'm testing, it's great, and it's all of a sudden it just doesn't work, and you're like, oh, what's wrong with the monitor? Oh no, it's my console. So then you got to be careful. But it's, even with stuff like that, I'm constantly working on the machines I'm used to test this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So
what's going on?
So you had those.
Yeah,
for me. So I was also looking up here in the background when when you talk, I sometimes check the model number just to make sure that I know everything's up. I had something similar. I sold a BVM to my friend Vlad, who owns the Time Sleuth. I gave him a good price. I like the guy, and I sold him a BVM 14. I want to say E1E or something like that, something of that ilk. It's got the controls down either side and can be rack mounted. And I sold to him for $100 because I'm a good guy.
You are a good
he's
guy.
me virtue signaling.
He must like you.
I got to know Vlad,
friends.
and I got to know him, and he's a cool guy. And I was happy that someone would be using this for retro gaming. So I'm happy for that. But he got it, and he called me, and he's like, bro, it turns off sometimes. And because it's that thing where I'm like, oh, I gave you this fucking deal of the century. And it's not his fault, not him, but, the time you give out the deal of the century is also the time that this thing's now got intermittent power problems as well. And you think like, oh, no good deed goes unpunished. And it's certainly not his fault. He just would like a monitor to work. And I think in the end, I went over there and I swapped the whole power board, the whole card. And thankfully that seemed to solve his problem, and I've still got that board. I think probably, I haven't even looked further into it because I don't use the 14s very much. But thankfully, because I was facing down the barrel of... Because not only did I give it to him, but Vlad lives in the suburb, the other side of town, in an old Russian apartment building called a Khrushchevsky, which is these typical Soviet buildings. And he lives like on the 6th floor. And here I am carrying this 14-inch heavy fucking thing. I was
those
like,
are
no,
heavy too.
I'm not taking it home. I really hope the card,
Yeah, those 14 BVMs are like 60 pounds if they're fully loaded. They're pretty heavy, which I kilograms. I don't know how that is, but that's a lot. I mean, that's not nothing.
So let me get what I was up to this week. Still right here in front of me. So I scored myself this 9-inch BVM.
Beautiful.
There. I do have a whole video coming out on this, which probably will be out by the time we're here. So
what
anyway,
does that say? What does that say up at the top on the other side of the Trinitron? Yeah, what does that say?
Serial digital interface.
Wow.
Isn't that SDI?
Yeah, but I've never seen one with that monikered or like advertised up there, which maybe it is. Maybe it's on there more often, but the bezels I've messed with have not had that. But everything else looks the same. Yeah, that's a good one. HR Trinitron. That means it probably has a little bit better tube. The tube should be a little bit better.
Because I have the.
There's like a 250 and a 450 TV line tube for that size, I believe. So there's a good chance if it says HR, it might have the higher line count one in
Because I actually have, that's the BVM. I actually have a 9-inch PVM sitting right here as well. And it doesn't say HR. It just says, so maybe it's a lower line count. It's not a PVM, BVM thing.
Sometimes, yeah. Sony really didn't. It was funny. Sony really didn't. They didn't like. Yeah, they weren't really consistent with that.
So I've got this. I found it locally. It was a classifieds ad. It said €50 for this month, and it said turns on but untested. And I went, oh, okay, fair enough. And when I rolled up to the place, it was actually a electronics repair store that you might take your Mac, or they could do soldering or other things like that sort of shop. So I sat there for a moment thinking, wait, why does the electronics repair store not test it? I'm kind of assuming at this stage, like it means untested means it doesn't work, but we'll say untested, right? And
is it really untested?
Right. Well, untested, but yeah, because isn't that a thing?
Or just unfixable, basically.
Yeah,
I couldn't fix this thing, so it's untested. Yeah.
I thought untested was sort of like Craigslist code word for it doesn't. I don't know. I don't want no responsibility.
Untested just basically means I don't know if it works. It could work, but I've not been able to test it.
I went in there, and they were very nice, and I'd already prearranged with the lady. I said, can I come and test it? She said, sure. So I brought my mister in. It's pretty easy to just fire it up. I just say, you plug that in the wall. Now, to answer the question about is it untested or something? Because then I started to think like, all right. But let's look at the where we go. This model has no on-screen display.
Yeah, the smaller ones never do.
Right.
Well,
and at
except
the
for
top
the
there-
L series does,
Oh, well,
but
the L, yeah.
but not
So
these older ones.
Actually, you're right, because that PVM that's on the floor is a 9L2.
It does
will
have a
take
menu. Doesn't
Right,
it?
and it'll say 480i. I remember that at least. It says 480i, PAL, that. But the thing is, because this doesn't have an on-screen display, and the way that you change the inputs is those 6 buttons that are at the bottom there.
It can be difficult
really
to figure out which one is which.
Very difficult. And unless you know, like, if you're worried that your device, your console isn't outputting, it could be really hard because you don't know, have I pressed the right combination? Have I gone through all the permutations of that? So that's the reason why when I saw it was this model, I understood why it wasn't tested. Because, I mean, the guy was like, oh, yeah, you could run a signal in on BNC. Oh, okay. But also, even if he turned it on, I can completely understand not being able to navigate those buttons.
No way.
Pressing them a few times and going, oh, well, it's done.
If you
I
don't-
turned it on, pressed
yeah.
some things, and he was like, oh, shit, it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't know, that's a classic with those, at least here, you used to be able to buy those on eBay pretty regularly in that same condition. I bought a couple of them, but then, they turn out to have something wrong with them. But sometimes, too, it would just be like untested. And the same thing with like the 1341 that I was telling you about, those 1340 models, they don't have any menu. And they are often a lot of times listed as untested, or you'll find them as untested because it's almost the same process of pushing buttons. It's just a little bit bigger. So it's very often that those people don't know how to only hook up. Even if you know how to hook something up into them, can you get it to select the right input?
So some questions I have for you about this monitor, Steve. The first one is, so it's a 9-inch BVM. Actually, I don't know how many TV lines, because this 9044D doesn't have a manual. I can find something close.
Okay.
But my
I
question
might
is,
be able
first
to
of all,
find something on it.
Yeah,
So it's the
see what you can pull up.
9044D. Well, go ahead and continue with your question.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, 50 euros. So what's that, like $60 or something like that? How do you feel about that price? With the price watch,
Considering
man
that
here?
it works, I think that's a great
Really
price
well.
because those are really condition dependent. Those ones, and if it works well and the tube's clean, you're talking about something that should be worth about at a minimum, if it's cleaned up, like $300. So that over into euros, I'm not sure how much.
I think they're not too far off. Let's type that in. But as you say, the 300 is what it would be if this unit was in the United States of America in that market.
Well,
We were
it
commenting
could
because they're
a
so
little more.
separate.
It could go for more depending on the condition. I'm actually looking at the American version statistics on this monitor, and I'm not exactly seeing the tube line count just yet. Yes, it is here. I found it. It's the 450 TV line tube, so that's actually worth at least $100 more. So you did really good on that one.
So 450. What's the other ones then? It comes
250. 250.
Oh, 250.
So
Wow.
that's half. It's a lot sharper than the other monitors are. That's a really good one. Yeah. Like
Nice. So the video looks
and
good.
it's a BVM, so yeah.
It's a BVM. I've decided I don't want to, because the grid was pretty much perfect. It was.
That's a perfect one for your
I'm
bench.
real happy to not fuck with it. Right. Yeah, exactly. Great.
That's
because it has
to test and footage.
S-video, composite, RGB, and component, all on a 19-inch screen that I can just.
Or you mean the 9-inch?
Sorry, 9-inch. Sorry,
Yeah,
19.
19-inch. Yeah, that's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's
now-
a great deal. I mean, I would have bought that too, and even if it wouldn't have been working right, I would have probably been
So
fine.
the next
with it.
question. The next question about it is, because I think I have another 904DD. I've got at least two more 9-inch monitors already, and I think both of them are having constant or intermittent problems with color on the composite or S-video signal. And I read some
what happens?
obscure
Does the color go
forums.
out?
Color's just out. Black and white, fine, and it's not an NTSC PAL thing. Like there should be color. I have the other 9044D. I have works RGB component, great, solid, looks good, but I can't get color out of the other two inputs. And the Googling that I did on this was that they think there's apparently a known issue, and cold solder joints on maybe the deflection board would be their first thing to check.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, that's going to give you it's just a task to sit there and reflow
like
solder on those boards. And it's a lot of there's a lot of points there. I've done it before. I have a video from a couple of years back where I've done it before where it could not even be the deflection board. It could be the color board, which is the opposite side. So you're ending up, I'd actually recommend that you reflow solder on the color board first.
Sounds logical.
And maybe, if you wanted to try to diagnose and find it, you could use a meter, right? That would be a little more difficult, but you can find where on that board the color is supposed to go, and then try to track continuity and see if you can finally figure out where it breaks. And because there's also a possibility that a capacitor on that line is dead, and then it would just also cause the continuity to be lost. So you're either looking at probably a capacitor dead or and I hate to say this because it sounds kind of bad, but that is such a common issue, and it's so much work that depending on the model, I had a ton of these 8040s, which, in your area it would be called a 9040. And those are the second most stripped down model of that monitor you're looking at. It's pretty much the same hardware, but it's half the parts aren't populated, and it's just going to give you one input for S-video and composite. But it does the same thing where the color board loses color. And rather than fix it, I've always just taken the tubes, flybacks, and power supplies out of them and frame and used them to rebuild the RGB monitors that have a bad tube in them. So it's like, because I probably picked up 5 of those 8040s over the years, and half of them, the color just, like, you'll watch it, it'll just go straight to black and white. Like you say, those only do composite and S-video, so it just happens on those. And then, but you're more than likely looking at cold solder joints or a capacitor out too, and so some board work there for you, Louis.
Something for the future. So at least now I've got this one. I know it's good. And look, if one comes up locally, $50, I'm like, I'm gonna go grab it.
Yeah, you should.
I went down, and when I plugged it in and it worked, and the guy went, oh, I should have asked more than €50 for this. And like within a heartbeat, I had the €50 in his hand. I'm like, mate, there you go. We're done. I'm out of here.
I did that one time when I went and looked at a monitor for a company, and it wasn't even a 240p model. It was a 480p, an up model, and it had RGBS or RGB HV sync BNCs in the back of it. And this company had been using it as a Barco is the brand, and they had been using it as a professional color monitor. And it's just like a huge, I'm reading about them. They got ridiculous line counts, really nice monitor. But I didn't know if it would natively do 240p. I knew it would do 480p and up. And so I went to the place and I was like, yeah, can I test it? And I brought a Genesis along, and I was like trying to plug it in. I was like, yeah, it's not taking the 240p, so I don't really want it. And they were wanting like $50 for it. And then I was like, thanks for letting me look at it. And then I went back like the next day and looked online at the listing. It had been updated to say like $500 for the monitor, retro gaming monitor, where they probably just gotten on Google and were like, oh, this guy, he was going to try to get us for this. And then I was like, it's not even the right monitor, but they just jumped all full in. Oh, I want to sell it for $500 now. And I was just laughing looking at the thing. It was like, pfft.
It's my favorite. You know me already. I'm just sending you links. I'm like, look at this, Steve. $50. I send you some links to my local classified. I'm like, oh, he's dreaming. Come on, mate.
Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy. So that was.
But yeah, so that was some cool pickups. I had a couple of pickups too this week that I thought I'd just show you really quick if it's okay. Because look, I was wearing the Atari shirt. We were laughing about it when we got started today, but I wanted to bring this up a little bit because I just saw this news that Atari is re-releasing some of these old games that they didn't release. There's 3 of them, right? And did you hear that story?
They might be re-releasing on cartridge, right?
Yes, on an original cartridge. Well, I started to read more about it, and it's ridiculous. They're only releasing 1983 copies, 1,983 copies of each, because that's the year they were supposed to come out. And it's
produced scarcity.
It's 3 games, and yes, and so I wanted to actually. I got an article from Forbes here that tells me everything. It's Yar's Returns, which is like the Yar's Revenge sequel, which was actually a pretty good game for that old system. And then there's a Aqua Venture, which was some silly sea hunt game where you just go to the bottom of the ocean to find fish and treasure. And then another game called Saboteur, which is trying to stop aliens from launching a warhead that will destroy the galaxy. Now, the real thing that like got me going on this was the what they were offering. So for $49.99 US, you can get just a cartridge, just the standard cartridge. And then they will have limited edition releases for $150, $149.99. These deluxe editions will include the cartridge, a poster, a printed instruction manual, possibly additional material, a collector's pin, a badge, and a digital copy, and a certificate of authenticity. But I was laughing because $150 doesn't even get you a box, right? So I went to that game show a couple weeks back, and they had a guy there who makes updated Atari games, and he has for years. His company's called Champ Games. I bought one of his games, his newest game, and it was $60. And look what he made. I was just going to try to show you off. This is from Atari Age, so you can order this. But this is the box, okay? I was like, $60, man. That's kind of a lot for an Atari game. But at the same time, I understood because he's a small-time game maker. He probably makes a couple hundred of these, and $60 is understandable. But he gave me the box, full box, glossy art. Of course, the cartridge. It came with a full, like, quality, awesome manual. I mean, look at this manual. It gives
looks good.
Like it
looks
gives
like
you
heavy paper, heavy stock.
It's heavy stock paper. It gives you like storylines, so you can actually get into this game more, which you had to use your imagination. Atari stuff, and then a poster. So I was like, well, what the heck? This is like such a money grab.
It is.
By
and
Atari,
I guess when they've made only
funny,
1,000, 2,000, they know they're going to sell them.
So it's all collector stuff, but they're so I don't know. I got that. I also I've so much Atari stuff. A little quick one here. This is something I finally picked up. Have you seen one of these? A Harmony cart?
No,
it
what's
is
that?
The ROM cart for the Atari 2600. So it's and it's really a great ROM cart. You don't have to download any files other than your ROMs. You stick them on the cart, and like all the firmware and software is already programmed inside here. So it was literally one of the most user-friendly plug and play.
A new product or a product?
No, this is like 10 years old because I got.
Okay.
I paid $60. That's another thing. I paid $60 and I got this. It play every Atari 2600 game ever made, and it came with another nice high quality manual with a little leaflet flyer for $60. And I always there's one game that I've been looking to play and it's called Hero. Have you heard of that one?
No, I haven't. No.
So it's a little like rescue game. You got a little 2D character with like a jetpack and helicopter pack on, and he runs around and rescues guys in levels. Really fun game. But if you go try to find it now, it's like I saw a grungy one at the show. An original copy is like $60 or $70 for a crappy looking 2600 cart. So I thought I'd rather just do that to try to play the game than try to chase down a lot of these rarer games you only play for like 5 or 10 minutes on Atari. And then I did go stop by my Goodwill for one last thing. Unless you wanted, you have any questions about this Atari stuff?
No, I think it's interesting about the Atari stuff is interesting because, I mean, they just straight up know they need some money. The collectors will buy it. This is a collectible. It's not an investment. It's just, okay, I need this, and they know there's enough autistic nerds out there to be like, I need this in my life right now.
And I think they've probably
with respect, I say autistic.
They've almost got that number nailed down probably perfectly because any more than 2,000 would be probably stock left on hand for them. They're going to have the crazy people and maybe even some hopeful, some scalpers probably grab some of them.
People are going to turn them around, and I don't know. It's already got a high price and not much. It's going to not end. Look, I'm not one of these people that thinks the speculation bubble is going to end. I'm not one of these things that thinks that the market's going to go to zero. There still has to be some market cap. But anyway, So with your 2600, are you still using one of the 2600s that you modded yourself from back in the day, or what are you playing it on?
Yeah, I've got a couple 2600s. If I go for a composite television, or RF television, and I use the regular RF, I have a cool 4-switch Sears 2600 that I've refurbished, and it's all original. I did add a cool little LED indicator light on it to tell you when it's turned on, but other than that, it's just been refurbished. And I've had that one for a long time. And then I've got the one that I've RGB modded, which is funny. RGB modded and S-video modded, and I don't even know where the RGB cable is anymore for it. I've lost it years ago, but it's literally pointless because it looks just as good in S-video for Atari. It's just there's not. I mean, to me, I can't really see much difference between the S-video quality on something that old. There's not a lot of detail in it already. It doesn't need to be overly sharpened. So I just use that one for S-video if I want something on a different, better resolution. But I like Atari on RF too. So
true, it's all part of
that's
it.
what I've been using it.
While we're talking about RF, we both found, I sent you that link this week to the RF modulator for 9-inch BVMs and PVMs.
That's so weird. I've seen that thing in the brochures as an accessory for a BVM, but I've never actually seen one. There was also one even for the bigger models. They have a whole base for the 20-inch PVMs of the 80s that you could add an RF tuner to it.
I was trying to pull one up here. I don't know whether it's this is some real dodgy way. But, so if you can see on my screen right now, it's a whole unit that will sit under about a 9-inch PVM. It has RF on the back and has then an out. So it's a separate unit. Yeah. And it has a RF jack in and has a composite out, which I think you're supposed to chain into your laptop. So your PVM. And I could see them... where's the one on the back? Wait, I'll bring up this one because this will show the back. So
it's got B and C stuff, right? Okay.
Look at the back. You can see there's an input and then an output.
What? I can't tell just from the resolution there. What is the? Is it a B and C? I can't remember. Is it still a B and C on the input for the RF?
It is. No, not a BNC. Nope, it's a regular
like
consumer
RF
aerial jack. Yeah, regular RF.
Is it coax or is it just a regular AV looking
coax?
Input?
It's coax.
Coax, so you got to screw something into it.
I think so. It's hard to
tell.
The
coax is where the one has just a single wire, and then it's like you have to spin.
Oh,
the
yeah.
screw
I
on
think
there.
now I know what you mean. No, it's an air it is a plug,
like an RCA plug.
That you not RCA like you would expect an RF plug in any consumer TV.
Okay. Yes.
It's not a screw in. I know. Yeah, I kind of now I know what you mean about the screw. It's so it has that as input, and then it's got line out next to it with a BNC for video and one RCA for your mono audio, and it also takes a battery. I see as well.
Yeah. Well, I guess so that you could do that with. Could you imagine having all those battery chargers? So you could have two batteries. What if you had to have 3 batteries or something? Yours is blocked off.
It's only got the I don't have this one. Doesn't have a battery, and I've only got the DC, which most of them have.
Yes, and I think that they might have even had a DC power pack with batteries probably in that, so you could just plug that up and go. Yeah. I have seen people. Yeah. So if here's something too, if the internal AC power supply fails on those models, I've actually seen people use and convert 12-volt DC power supplies from old laptops and just plug them into those prongs on the back of that BVM, and it powers on without, because it'll use either power supply, it'll use either power support source in the monitor.
That's a good tip. That's a good tip. So I don't think people are thinking about try to use that other DC jack on the back.
So that's that's kind of a trick on there. And so that's cool. I mean, I'd just be more interested in seeing the how so it looks like it's just converting it to composite and then sending it through. So I wonder if it has any cool features. It looked like it had some buttons on the front and stuff. So
I'm trying to
It's definitely, and I wonder if it does anything to how. Depending on what your area is, your RF signal, if you're like in New York City or a highly populated area, there's so many different signals coming in that it interfere with just the signal RF signal. I wonder if there's any technology in that device that, like, since you'd be used to a bunch of signals in a pro environment, if it does anything to help that RF signal kind of limit interference in it. But maybe
Good
that's
question.
just wishful thinking.
Wait, where did I? You bastard! I had it up and then I clicked the wrong.
Well, it's either way, I think it's a cool. It would be more fun to use that and see to test RF
It's just
stuff.
some buttons. There's some LCD on the front, I assume, to show you your channel or something like that. It seems like a fairly straight up and down device. I guess it's just because, like, I'd never seen it before. And I was like,
Right.
oh shit, there's something about BVMs and pro monitors that I've never seen. And you gotta, this is my new obsession.
Yeah, it's definitely more exciting to me than like the SDI stuff. I'd rather mess with RF on them than SDI at all most of the time.
At least there's some gaming relevance, so you could take one of the old things. How would you? Well, there are a lot of people out there who are like, how do I get my? A lot of people still have questions. How do I get my RF on HDMI? How do I get my RF on something? But that unit I could get one shipped from Germany, already in the EU, so very good. But it was about 120 euros shipped.
That's that's expensive,
Fun, but yeah.
Yeah, for like $30 fun or something. Yeah, you don't want to just spend your that much on it. I had two more items that I got. I'll show you real quickly from Goodwill. So we talk about thrift stores. I did show you. I picked up a Xbox 360 controller for $2.99 wireless. So
bargain.
I needed one of those. I know. And then I found this. I love getting these old school. Not even that old. This is just some boxed PC game.
Neverwinter Nights, yeah.
And Neverwinter Nights 2, $2.99. And the only reason I bought this one too is it had everything in it. It's some limited edition. It's kind of silly. It came with even what was this thing? I was going to like these little terrible good versus evil rings you're supposed to wear and a play mat, and I was laughing and I was like, yeah, this is when
you got to get that for $3.
So yeah, I was like, $3, I'll take it. And I might actually, this game, I never played it. I think it's like a Baldur's Gate style, almost not as good as Diablo kind of game from 2006. So I thought maybe I'd hook it up to my, I've got a Pentium 4 PC, that I restored, and so it'd be perfect for that. So that's I was like, I could hook that up. I even got it. I added a new card to my Pentium 4 where it has HDMI out in the video card, and so it's like this really old. So I could even do capture out of it. I was going to try to play around and see how that looked.
Oh, dope. Okay. Well, I thought, Steve, looking at the timer, we're at about 43 minutes. So why don't we just jump into the questions?
Yeah,
the
that'd be a
topics
good
are
idea.
Just to keep us going. So
sure.
You got so the idea, dear listeners who are listening at home, is that Steve and I were asking for questions on our Twitter and in the comments. So if you are listening to this and you have questions about, I don't know, any of the crap we're talking about, but maybe specifically CRTs, monitors, all the stuff that Steve and I like to talk about, I think just write them in the comments of this video. I review all the comments and we'll find it. We're not so popular guys now that we're like, oh, I had too much input. I possibly find it. Like,
yeah, we can.
Cool.
I think that's cool. Yeah, we could. I
We'll
think
find
that
your
if you've definitely listened to this point in the show and you have a question, don't hesitate to put it down below, and we'll, it might be a couple episodes before we get to it, but if it's a good, sincere, good question, we will definitely do our best to get you a good answer on here.
yeah. So, okay, we got some. You got one first, or you want me to fire away? Or?
Why don't you go ahead and start, and then we'll finish out with the one I got in case
Sure.
people want to really stay around for the long, boring talk on Convergence.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about Convergence. This is our big
that's the
thing.
question.
Stay to the end.
Yeah, stay till the end if you want to hear the Convergence question.
Convergence talk. So there was a quick one from Lou, who I interviewed from Lou's
Yeah.
Retro Source, and just a quick one.
Cool channel.
He's a very cool dude. Is there any way to easily determine if a CRT can be RGB modded? Are there any specific versions of the jungle chip I should be looking out for? And my kind of response was, not really. That was kind of the point of our talk.
There is. Wait, there is. There
Okay,
is
yeah.
one. And this is one of the questions I actually read ahead of time and I was thinking about it. I was like, yes, there. I was like, no, there's not. Oh, wait, no, yes, there is. The way, now it's going to be hard to look for a specific television unless you know that, but if the way is to get the service manual for the television. So, because in the service manual, it will tell you the jungle chip and you will be able to look for RGB blanking. Those are the 4 things you need. You need RGB out. It will say it on individual pins, and then you need a blanking out. And that more than likely means you could RGB mod it. So that's the best thing I can tell anybody and that's real easy to do. You can do that before you even get a TV, right? If you think you want to RGB model or mod a model, you can try to find the service manual. If you can't find the service manual, then maybe try to move on to a different television that you can find a service manual from. But the service manual is your best friend right then with that. So that would be the biggest tip.
My broad advice to Lou was also, only from my own personal experience, I mostly have worked with consumer Trinitron TVs, and I would broadly say somewhere around the mid-90s, maybe even to the mid-2000s, what I have seen at least, better chance of having something like in there. But I don't know Samsung, I don't know NBC or other brands.
It's weird, too, because there are certain models that might not have the right RGB chip where you have to do an S-Video mod like we had talked about too, where it might, and those are specific to Sony. But again, all that will be definitely in the service manual. And yes, there is a good rule though that most Trinitrons from the early to mid 90s into the later 90s are going to be good candidates. The black shell, lots of those. If we kind of talked about this too though, if it already has component in it, it could still be modded, some of them, but then it could be a little bit trickier because you're getting into a newer TV with more stuff in it, and it's a little bit I feel personally pointless if to go to that extent, unless you just I think that you're going to find a better candidate a lot in those. If you're looking for one specifically to RGB mod, look for the Trinitrons that already have just, the best one will be one that already has like 2 composites and 1 S-Video in it. That way you can have, at the end of the day, RF, composite, S-Video, and RGB in one single TV.
Okay. That's good. All right, all this is good stuff, and I'm sure people will appreciate that. That's because it is hard to nail this one down.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. More questions. So thanks, Lou, for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Lou.
Next up, we've got Hydrozan, who says he has a consumer. He has a JVC, I think it's 28-inch, something like that.
Okay.
We have the full model here, and he says it blows fuses. Where would you start? So I presume it turns on and, blows fuse. So again, it's a difficult thing to die. Does he mean the house fuse?
No. I'm sure there's
device?
fuses in the power supply and in the television itself. So most of the time, the fuses on the power supply will be on the high voltage. So I would first tell them to look at the power supply itself. If it's a separate power supply, it will be isolated from the rest of the board, or isolated on its own board, like a PVM has its own power supply. But some models incorporate that power supply within the same main board. If it's that case, then you'll be able to see tracks on it that mark it out as the power block, and it'll generally say hot on it or power supply on it. And I would start looking at components in there. The good thing about the power supply is there's a lot less components to check if something is wrong generally. So I would go through there and take a multimeter, or first I'd visually inspect that power supply area and see if there's any components that look to be gone bad. And then, barring that nothing is visibly bad and it's still blowing fuses, you got to figure out like which fuse. Sometimes they have multiple fuses, so is it blowing right when it comes into the TV? If that's the case, then something's going on between. That's a very small area to check. You could have a broken wire or something. The wire could be grounding against something and causing a bridge effect and shorting out. But if it's generally, it's probably going to be the one that's after that, where the power is going through the power supply and then coming out the other end. That's usually the blown fuse, if that's because of an issue within the TV. In that case, just isolate your check to the components that are like between the plug in the wall and that fuse. You don't need to go beyond that fuse because nothing's getting beyond that fuse. And so you're only troubleshooting at least probably 10% of the CRT, at least at that point. And then if it comes down, worse comes to worse, you should recap it, and then you can pull out a multimeter and you can test the resistors and the diodes while they are in series with any multimeter just about. So you can check all those parts, and hopefully you'll find what the problem is. Because it could be, again, any one of those parts could be bad diode, could be, the diodes do fail, and that would be kind of an issue. So, or a cap, and that's kind of like the diagnosis process that I'd kind of go through on that.
That's good to know. I mean, that's your process. It's hard to know exactly what it's going to be here. And like what you said, I think before my 14-inch PVM burnt in my car, I did recap the PSU on that. It didn't fix my problem, but I do concur with what you said, that power supplies in these things, not so many. And it can sometimes be, look, if you got some weird power issues that you're just pulling your hair out of, well, there's not that many on a power supply usually, so
yeah, even the PVM's power supply, now not a BVM, BVM's power supply will have a lot in it, but a PVM's power supply, it does have a considerable amount of components in it altogether, but it's not nearly as much as the rest of the monitor together. And if you do have to recap it, most of those are under 15 caps. They could be as little as, I've seen pro monitors with as little as 6. Heck, the 8-inch PVMs, they have a power supply that's inside there, and it's only got 4 capacitors in it. But one of those 4s will go bad, and it will cause the power supply to not work. So,
and again, they will. I've learned from watching your videos that those power supply caps will often go bad because they're around the heat. That's where the heat is being generated.
Exactly. Especially some of these units that would have been left on forever. Now, when you're looking at like a consumer grade television, that's probably because either depending on the age of the TV, since it's a consumer grade TV, I would think it would be because more than likely a component was cheaper to begin with, so it could just wear out, right? It's just like you could visibly not see anything wrong with a capacitor on something like that, and test it, and it could be just flat gone and be completely dried out internally and not do anything, and you wouldn't know the difference from the outside, because they would have used cheaper parts for that. And I'd also check the solder integrity. We talked about cold solder and solder joints again. So that's always a possibility, because, again, they're using lower quality solder on the manufacturing of these televisions than compared to Sony, where they know these things are going to be running, or any professional. I mean, Ikegami. Any of the professional ones where they know they're going to be powered on for hundreds of thousands of hours, possibly.
All right, cool. So let's go. We've got a few more. So you've got your talk about convergence. Have you got any other questions besides that?
No, that was just I only saved the one question this week. So if you have any more, fire them away, or we can.
We've got a few more short ones here.
Okay.
Robbie JVC was asking, have you, in your experience, do you come across many 16:9 standard def CRTs in your lookings?
Not very often. Funny enough, somebody did bring by an Ikegami 16:9 24-inch Pro custom analog only monitor. So unfortunately, it was custom made, and it's got like 100 parts bad on it, I think. So it's not, I can't get it to start. It's have to be a lot of replacing and troubleshooting in this one. But I do not come across a lot of widescreen CRTs whatsoever, at least not here. I can't even, other than that one and like the BVM D series ones and A series ones that are professional, and those are all professional. Ikegami technically is professional too. I just don't see those TVs, I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if there's just not a lot of them were sold. It was just such a small time frame, right? It's a small time frame, and they weren't great. Like they don't have a great reputation, and I don't like. I mean, here's a secret: I don't like widescreen CRTs. I know that this might.
What do you think? Is that just some dogma, or
it's just me. I like 4x3. I don't know. It's just like,
well, you're right.
I like
very
that.
Narrow
I like
window
that
of time.
resolution. The problem is when you try to put, even if you have a good monitor and you try to put 16:9 content on it, like a 20L5, you're losing resolution when it goes down to widescreen. You're losing 200 lines of resolution. The monitor tells you in the processing the picture. It goes from an 800 line picture down to a 600 line resolution. So you're losing that resolution. You're losing screen real estate. I just like. I know it sounds weird. I just like the whole 4:3 aspect ratio. I always have, and
it's part of it.
I think that just makes. That's what CRTs are good at. Just like widescreen stuff, 16:9 is going to be better on a good widescreen television. I just not seen those very many.
I think I'd like one to watch like DVDs or movies or something like that on. But you're right. I mean, first of all, one thing you said was the time that they made 16:9 CRTs very short. So by the time they get to the period that they're like, oh, we should make a 16:9 version of this, we're already thinking of, well, should it have higher? That's why a lot of them have got 480p, 720 even, or something like that. It's in that weird transition phase before flat panels really kicked in. I think I would like one if one came up in my area that is useful, even if it was a big ass one that I needed a trolley for. I would get it. I would get it because not only is 480p a problem, or if it's got with this, because this person said standard def specifically. Yeah,
standard def would be because there's not even that much put in standard def that's in 16:9.
What I would love, so when I see them locally in standard def, they are usually 99% of the time these 100 hertz models or 120 hertz models for your area. So 50 hertz PAL area, and for people who are watching, the explanation is that the technology, when you see 100 hertz or 120 hertz on a CRT, what it's doing is doubling the signal, displaying it twice as fast to try to, and it's specifically for motion, for video, to make that smoother. But that interpolation, I don't know what it's called, that doubling, it's not just a line doubling, it's something else happening there.
Well, it's kind of like similarly like FPS. Now everybody's concerned with like your frames per second. This was kind of how they used the hardware to, increase that, try to increase that almost same effect where frames per second, things like that.
Try to add.
Because you're adding literally more visual content on a screen twice as fast.
So it's got to do, by design, it's got to do processing on that picture when it's coming in. It's doubling it or doing that processing. So that's a problem.
You mean for lag and stuff.
Well, so that, as I have understood, I have personally not tested them myself. From what I read, those 100, 120 hertz sets are not good for 240p content. They typically will interpret it anyway as 480i, but I've heard of some that do it fine. But there is some processing that's going on. So look, there can be a 100 hertz set that works good and is fine, but I've come to understand apparently more often than not, the 100 is not. When I see 100 hertz, I turn down the offer.
Well, that's a good thing to look for, but I'll be honest with you. I can't think of a single standard def widescreen television that I've ever come across in the 5 years I've been looking at. I can't think of a single one that no one's even offered no one said, hey, I even got one that I want to get worked on or anything. It's just, again, what are you even accomplishing with a 16:9 analog picture? Because I don't even know. Limited. Yeah. It's like weird. I don't even know what the goal almost is there. But
I think I could watch DVDs.
What is I'm trying to think of like a definitive 480i movie that I would that's in like widescreen. It's like, oh, they released, it's like get Dancing with the Wolves on widescreen VHS and hope it's a good copy. Or I was looking at the VHS. I always look at the VHS tapes at Goodwill, and I almost bought one. But half the time now you have to look at the tape itself, and because it's you get in there and then like mold is growing on the tapes. I actually went and took this. I showed you, I didn't bring it down here. I showed you that VCR I bought, you know, and I was trying to test it with a tape I was going to buy. And so I put it in there and I'm like, oh, the VCR's not working because it's like making these noises, and it spits the tape out. The tape's just ripped into pieces and like ripped it apart. And I look at the tape and it's just like gunked with gray mold, and it's probably not even turning. And so I was like, oh, well, I got to throw this tape away and then go. I went and got a good tape that I could see was in good shape, and it was working perfectly. But it's, yeah, I don't know what exactly you're chasing on nostalgia there, unless your grandparents had a real fancy analog widescreen television growing up or something. You have a specific experience there. But if anybody does know anything about it, definitely let us know with some comments below and what you think. If there's a specific model that you know of, definitely put it down there, and we'll research it and talk about it again. That's fine with me if we can find one.
All right, we got two. We got one more. I got one, a longer explanation, and you've got one. So let's. We're just at the hour, but I think we'll do these two more questions, and then we're good. So the first one is, really what we're trying to say is, can you give an explanation of what the black film, the black stuff on the back of a tube is? I believe it's called Aquadag. So it's that you pull the dag. That's a rude word, and that means the stuff that hangs off a sheep's ass in New Zealand. Is it? A dag, yeah. And there's a bit of shit hanging off a sheep's ass in New Zealand. Oh, mate, that's a dag on the sheep's ass. Yeah.
Well, I think here they call it a dingleberry, but but yes, absolutely. So that's a great question. The great question. I actually was reading about this the other day because it's actually quite interesting, more interesting than I thought it would be for a CRT nerd. So the DAG is actually on the back of the tube, right? You can see it when you're working, and it's not all over the back of the tube. It's on a portion that excludes the anode cap and the neck of the tube, and kind of around that. And then like the rest of the back of the tube, it'll just have this gray, blackish, metallic, very dull looking paint on it, and that paint actually has it's conductive, so it's electrically conductive. So on the back of the monitor, it is there to help with grounding and your flow of current, because there's so much electricity inside there. It helps dissipate electricity that way. So that's why you'll notice on the back of 90% of CRT tubes, there's a metal ground strap that will go around the tube, and it's just basically an exposed wire. Almost sometimes it's a springy wire, sometimes it's just a piece of wire, and it goes straight across that DAG so that the electrons will go through the grounding, and they ground out against the back of the tube too. So you know, like that dissipation of energy happens quicker. But that's not even the only thing. I found out that the DAG is done on the inside of the tube also. So the manufacturing, and this is the most important thing about it, the DAG is done on the inside of the tube, and since it's electrically conductive, what it does is it has a very specific purpose. So you have your cathode at the back of your neck board, and your cathode ray gun through the tube. It gets its signal to push out electrons, and that hits your phosphor screen, and it gives you an image. But like we said, that electron gun is sitting out new images every, at its rate, whatever your hertz rate, your screen rate is, it's sending it out there. So what it's doing is it's pushing a new image out of the screen, and that other image goes away, right? It has to go away, the one you just saw. So what happens is the electrons are shot onto the phosphor, and the way that electron travels to get out of the tube through the anode, which is your anode cap. So the electron gun beams the image, it moves, it's pushed out by the image that's coming behind it, it's pushed down the tube, it travels along that conductive path easily to the anode cap, and then the high voltage goes out and is reused through the system. The And so that's the biggest thing it's doing internally, and that's why the tube will always have that on the inside. The third thing it's good for, which I found this out too, was the fact that you're dagging the internal tube and then you're dagging the outside. So we got a bunch of sheep shit on this, right? Sheep dingleberries hanging
dag
there.
away.
So anyway, you got this double thing. It actually, that process when you're running electricity through there, it turns it into a mini capacitor. You got like 0.1 microfarad capacitance happening between the two layers of DAG. So it actually acts as a film capacitor in the monitor and helps with ripple current control a little bit. So it's there's so much going on. I thought originally it was just to keep you from seeing through the tube, but it's not. I actually went in and researched it. So there's a lot of a lot actually going on with that. I thought about making a whole video about it, but I just kind of said it all here. Maybe I will sometime still soon.
No, make another one. It's all good. I mean, we'll probably turn this into a clip anyway, but make it again. That would be
cool demonstration showing some of that stuff in the tube.
Would be good to see it.
Yeah, so that's why if you ever turn the tube off, and especially if you're like on the back, you can definitely hear that, that electricity coming off that. And yeah, that is conductive paint. That paint is meant to be conductive. So yeah, those are the three things for DAG. Four things now, since we know it's a slang term.
So if I'm also looking at the question that the Boss Hahad, the user, posted, and they had said that what they had inadvertently done is stripped off a lot of this paint and this film. Now, I saw that you can buy, I think you told me, I know you can buy this stuff. Is it possible to repaint
it? Or? There is. You can go... because this happens in arcade games all the time. Arcade guys, they have way more bigger cojones than me when it comes to like their CRT cleaning technique. I'm very like meticulous and fragile because I'm afraid that me going and doing a hardcore cleaning on one of these machines is going to cause some kind of an issue, whether it's corroding a solder point or something. So I just don't usually take that risk, but arcade guys do it all the time where they'll spray the monitor down with a cleaning solution of green stuff or something, and they'll just hose it off. And then a lot of times that DAG washes off. So if you go to any arcade supplier website, they will have bottles of that you can go in and just repaint on the same areas on the back of the tube. And as long as you let it sit there and dry, it'll work perfectly. Because again, the DAG on the back is only used as that minor capacitance that I don't know how much it impacts the actual performance. I think that's just something where it was like an extra little bit better on the end. They weren't expecting that to happen maybe, or they thought maybe it could happen. But the bigger thing is just like the grounding and the current in the back of the tube and helping it ground correctly. So I would just recommend, if you did wash it off, go and find you a bottle of that stuff. It's got to be less than $10 and paint it back on there. Don't worry about it because you won't see it, as long as it's a good layer.
Do you have experience that if the DAG has been taken off, does the TV still generally work?
Yeah, I mean, it should still generally work. It's just I don't know. I've always been really careful with it just because I've known about it. But
okay. I mean, it's not like how to say. I mean, yeah, sure.
Well,
it's
see, the thing is like if you already take it apart to the point where it's that dirty and you've already like gotten it off there, rather than just like reassembling the monitor or the television and seeing if it makes a difference and then taking it apart again to reapply. Most of the time, people just go ahead while it's taken apart and reapply it and then just put it back together. So, it'd be an interesting study sometime to see how. Actual difference. I mean, I'm sure it does make some difference, so they wouldn't have done it, right? They wouldn't have just added it. And it's something that's on every single CRT tube. So it's something that has to be there. Also, I mean, maybe that's the point where it does also affect the black levels or something where maybe you could see some transparency through there, possibly on some tubes. I don't know.
There's a good video for you in the future. Take it off.
Yeah.
Find an old tube, take it off, and see what differences it makes.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. You know, maybe we can make it transparent. Maybe we can make a transparent tube, right? Ooh. Why not, right?
Arty.
As long as everything else works, let's just see what happens. It's a good idea.
And it's going to be
Lewis.
safe.
I like that.
First of all, we know
let's get a crappy 13-inch television, 10-inch television around here, and see if we can do that. That'd be fun.
Nice. We got a video for the future.
There we go.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's talk about.
Let's do this last convergence question. I got a question here from supporter Tom Watson. He asked, "Hi, I hope you are well. I recently purchased a Sony PVM 2130QM, which is a European model of the 2030, pretty much. It's in good condition, but has a slight split colors on the top half of the screen. Might you be able to help diagnose the issue?" And he sent some pictures. And he's in London, so I was. This is a good example where I can't really look at the TV in person and help out. So, what he's complaining about here is when you look at your screen, and this is something that happens in that 2030 model a lot. You'll look at your screen straight on, and you notice maybe if you pull up a convergence pattern, your convergence is not that good. Maybe at like the top 1/4 of the screen, or like the bottom 1/4 of the screen. Or it could be both.
Here, convergence is when the three beams are coming together to create a color, and convergence is when the three beams are not aligned properly and they're not hitting.
Right. So the convergence happens is like you have red, green, and blue are your primary colors, and then those will be mixed with intensity to make a color on the screen, and those need to align. Or if they don't, they'll still send the same color signal, but instead of seeing like one dot with all the right color on it, you're seeing a little bit of the red over here, a little bit of the blue over here, and a little bit of the green in the middle. So everything looks a little bit blurry. It can get, it makes the picture not look so good. So there's two types of convergence defined for CRT. First off, you have static convergence, and what that is that's the convergence at more the middle section of the screen, so the exact center, and then like go out from that for about 2/3 of the screen. And then the dynamic convergence is around the edges and in your corners, so they have ways to adjust this. This is all controlled from the hardware in the deflection yoke. So I've got some stuff here I want to show you. So this is like a standard PVM. I mean, this is a pretty good one. Pretty high-tech deflection yoke here. A lot of copper. This is what's helping produce your picture on the screen. And so this is wedged against, you see my eyes in the middle. This is wedged against the back of your tube like this. And this magnetism is used to give you an image that looks good and square on your screen. It's also used to line up those beams. Magnetism. It's using electricity and magnetism to do this. And that's why a lot of this stuff is custom. And for example, in this, you see how someone's gone in here and added all these little extra magnets in here because something just wasn't right. I got another one.
And that's an aftermarket job that you noticed.
Yeah, so this is when like they've installed at the factory. This is not something. This is a factory installation. So like on this one, they got a couple right here too. Adhesives. And sometimes those are there's magnet strips in there too, just to add some extra magnetism. So what happenens?
Episode you were saying, in the last episode you were commenting that it's very common that these TVs would be tuned, would have something like this done in the factory.
Oh yeah, this is always done at some level in the factory because this has to be, there's not a factory. This you get your tube, on in the frame, and then you can't have like a machine. You probably could have a machine, but you'd be better off with a human touch to slowly, especially back in those days, slowly go and put this over the neck because it fits tight, Slide it over the neck. You have to tape the neck board or the neck of the tube a certain way to get that on there. Well, this thing is so precise. It has to be, this is how, like, it's going to sit. This is the top side right there like that. So it's going to sit like this is the tube right here, the back of the tube that it's sitting in. It has to be at a perfect angle. Okay? Like it can't be out a little bit, aim like this, or even side to side. It can tilt just a hairline, and that can cause you all kinds of issues because it's trying to line up beams. And if it just tilts one way, like the opposite side will look unconverged. And what controls that is, again, we're talking about service manuals. You can always refer to the service manual to tell you all about the stuff I'm trying to explain. The tube has these on the back of it that are wedges that give it, you know, a specific set point, and then like this one would have 3 of these wedges around, right, on the tube back. I don't know. Do you kind of see what I'm saying here?
Yeah, no, I see it. It's really good. We see
so the wedges go sit there, and so what happens over time is this will these wedges are like anything. The stuff will break down on them, and they'll just slip, fall out of place, and your yoke will move a little bit, and then it'll mess up your convergence. So that's something you always got to check. The wedges, make sure it matches the manual, because the manual will tell you, hey, your wedges need to be here, here, and here, and that way you set it. Because again, some guy's doing this, so it's like you got to do this, and you got to have the wedges here and here and here on the back of the tube, and then it needs to be aimed in this perfect spot, or it will have problems on your dynamic edge convergence. So it explains it there. So what's just happened a lot of times is one of these will fall in place, or this will shift at some time when the monitor's been moved. It's only secured by a single screwed on like ring. It's not even on this one. It's on this one here.
Pushed in the back. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you push it against the back of the tube, and the only thing that holds it in place is this one screw ring. Like it puts pressure on the back here. So this is all floating free technically. It's just held by that back pressure. So if that screw becomes loose or moves, you know, it's a pretty easy thing that can move. Okay? And it causes the whole picture to become messed up. So that's the first thing I always tell people to when I work on a monitor, and if it's got any convergence issues, the first thing I do is check what we just talked about. I check the yoke angle and make sure it's looking like it's right up against there. And honestly, a lot of times if there's any issues whatsoever, the first thing I do is loosen this ring. The first thing I do is loosen this ring, and then, you know, check the wedges, make sure they're there, and then I will literally you know, check the wedges, make sure they're there, and then you know, check the wedges, make sure they're there, and then I off push this, you know, forcefully while the monitor. A lot of that is push this, you know, forcefully while the monitor shit up against the back of the tube and try to level it out, and after shit up against the back of the tube and try to level it out, and after convergence issues because it's actually getting in and it's in its right spot, you know, convergence issues because it's actually getting in and it's in its right spot, you know, that if you're lucky you can check, and it's not on every one. That if you're lucky you can check, and it's not on every one there. It'll control these two settings, which is dynamic convergence. So you can actually spin those a little bit, which and tighten up the dynamic convergence beams with a convergence pattern. So that's what I tend to do. I tend to, you know, reseat the yoke.
So if
and check all that, and then I'll toy with those, right? And then after that, I check to see the convergence rings. Which did you have a question? Because I'll go through the rings after that.
Sure. I mean, I guess because the convergence rings are good. So you push the yoke into the back of the tube and it sits there. Now, you told us how fine this is and how razor sharp, it has to be in exactly the right position. Is that hard for you? Like, but you put the yoke on, you find the manual, you put the wedges in the correct position, give it a bit of force, screw in, and you eyeball it, and you see like, okay, that looks straight.
And sometimes it's literally there. Like, you know, you might try it 3 or 4 or 5 times, and sometimes it doesn't improve it. Maybe it already was in the right spot. Okay, and that's where you move on to the next step with like the rings I was going to tell you, but. That's like but that's the first thing you want to do, because you want to go ahead and you know that is much easier, and that's much easier than adjusting the rings. Well, we just talked about that with us, you know, getting in there and moving just this whole thing is adjusting the rings. It's way easier, and it doesn't. If you don't have it set up like in the right spot to begin with, you could play with the rings and everything else and just make it worse, because it's not. You know, this is like, well, you're out of calibration to begin with, so you're just trying to recalibrate something that's never going to probably be able to do that in the first place. The yoke has to be seated in the right spot within its tolerance to be able to do that.
Is when you're pushing the yoke on, and let's say it does it. Does that typically fix the?
This is going to be more dynamic stuff. Dynamic was on the edges. It will affect static convergence some, but thankfully, static convergence is the easiest one to adjust most of the time, and you know, there's an H stat adjustment on the neck board that lines the whole darn thing aligns all the beams horizontally. The problem is more or less the vertical orientation. That's where they get thrown off. And again, if the yoke's not tilted right, even the horizontal won't line up. So you always keep convergence. Like your convergence needs to be good in the middle. And sometimes you just have to deal with crappy convergence on the edges and just have it and live with it on some sets, because they're never going to get past that. They're just good at the good horizontal or the good static convergence. Okay. Okay, yeah, yeah. So like if you if you get into the situation then where you're like you still need more adjustment. These like we talked about factory setting. These yokes tend to have a factory setting, right? They're always set by the factory in some way, the technician who originally did them, and they generally go through and they use some kind of white epoxy on the rings. So you can tell. Now, this one's been screwed with a bunch of times, so it's got like other glue. My process, after I get the yoke seated, if it still doesn't look right, generally I'll go and I'll look at these rings and I can tell that they've been moved from the standard factory setting. And the reason I can tell that is because the residue remains on these from the white, you know, where they originally set it. So like this is a starting point, because that's not even, you see how there's like a starting point there on the yoke itself. And see how I line those top two rings to match that? So I go through and I always line these up to the original setting to start. Okay? Like, so you can keep going around, and then you can line all those up to where you try to make that white go all the way across to its original setting. And because most of the time you are not going to be able to set these better than what they were done in the factory. You know, they were professionals doing this, and they did it all day. This is like, so 9 times out of 10, the original setting is the best setting. So you get it back to that, and it usually looks pretty good. If it's in the original setting, you can attempt to make a ring adjustment, but that's like the worst thing. The most painful thing to do is those rings in anything, I feel like. So I always come back to that. That's a good tip, is to try to, and if it's not been messed with, hopefully it's already working. But those rings are there, and then you got your final step. If you after you get done with the rings and set, if you still have problems in your corners, then you can use, you know, just these convergent strips behind the yoke in each tube. Yeah.
All right, walk us through those.
Well, you know, the tubes against
I still don't quite get
tubes
how
against the yoke, and the idea is you got the you know, you're like, this is the top corner, and you might have on the image side out in front, the corner where my finger is, you might notice your convergence doesn't look good in this corner. So this is just a magnet on a stick, like a straw. That's all it is, plastic with a little magnet. You're just going to go and slip that down in between the layer. So you see how we've got these here? You're just manually adding magnetism to the inside of this to manipulate those corners to where they align. So the magnetism just sits there, and you're like, okay. And that's why if it moves a little bit, it could throw the whole thing off, because it's magnets, and it will affect it negatively if it's not set correctly. So that's the final part, is sitting those strips in, and that's a little bit more difficult. The strips in the rings are harder too, because you got to do that while the monitor's powered on, and so that's where you're going to get safety
where,
stuff.
Again, safety alert
but
for everybody.
You can do
be very careful.
You can do everything else that we talked about in the first section of this with the wedge check and the yoke reseating. You can do that by just, you know, have a surge protector, power off the power to it, make your adjustment, power it back on, give it a second. You might be sitting there doing that for 30 minutes. You know, it needs to go a little bit more to the right, to the left, you know. So, but anybody can do that really safely, because they can do it while the monitor's turned off. It's just once you get into the fine tuning of those other parts, and you can realign the yoke rings without it being turned on. So that's kind of, I know that's I don't know how much of that actually made any sense, but if that was a decent explanation,
it's good.
Yeah,
I think it's a
pretty
very
depth.
good start for it. I mean, I understood. I've been in the back of monitors, so I understood, and I didn't know some of those things that you talked about, so that was really good. And I think, though, that I'm sure that people would love to see like a video where you explain this and work it through.
Yeah, it
I'm
probably
sure
would. It's
a really popular one.
It's it's the problem is it's like it's again I try to avoid like those doing unless it's absolutely necessary doing those ring adjustments because there's a method but it's not
and I was always like, and I see they're
difficult
epoxied
because you move one a little bit and it throws off every other spot on the screen. It's like
Would it be a good idea if someone was going to mess with the rings, let's say, and the epoxy was already broken so they could move? Would it be a good idea to like
it's
take
always,
a photo
if you
of the
don't,
ring so you've got that starting
that's
point?
why it's a good thing that the white stuff just always seems to stay there 95% of the time. But there were instances where maybe it's been done 2 or 3 times. Yes, you should always have a picture, and I would even go through and take a Sharpie and like mark, lines on there where I'm like, okay, if this worst comes to worst. Because, adjusting that rings, that's the problem is you get to the point you're like, golly, this is worse than to begin with. Where the heck did I start with? You go reset, and then you try a different method because it's archaic, and it's like, you're spinning a wheel. And then it's like, well, there's 4 of them there that are affecting, so how many different combinations can you have of 4 wheels spinning around? Yeah, exactly. It's like it's a lock or a clock. It's more complex than a clock. It can have more combinations than a clock on a whatever. So
typically when you're adjusting convergence on rings, is the amount in your experience again is the amount that you need to move the ring typically like a millimeter, or is it like
can make a big
centimeter?
Difference just from a millimeter movement. That's the problem. Is it's like it can be very, very, very picky, and and it's very sensitive. And like I said, sometimes you're stuck with whatever the yoke and the TV ultimately can do. There was a point where it's like, we got it here, and it's like Sony's like, well, it's like 95% of the way there, and that's all we have to do is be like 93% there to make it a good product. So they're not going to go and try to achieve that extra 5%. And I think it's because is that even achievable? It's like, is that achievable? I don't know. You can't. You're not going to get it perfect. There's nothing. I've never seen as much as I've never seen one. Now that's why people love the like the D20 and the D24 and those higher end BVMs, because you have all these settings we talked about, except for the rings. You can actually go in there and manipulate the convergence through the software in those. So you just sit there and turn a dial, and it'll literally start lining up your convergence on the screen. So you don't even have to touch anything in the back of the monitor. You can sit there and just play with convergence all day to your heart's delight, trying to line it up if you want. And it's a lot of fun on those because you're just sitting there. You don't have to get dirty. And if you want to hit reset, you just hit like back to whatever it was before, and it'll just go boom back to the original setting that you're not saved.
Well, Steve, we're just coming up on an hour and a half.
Yeah.
I'm glad that we went longer on this one. I'll put the time codes in, and this is awesome information that, look, even if someone's not doing I'm not doing a convergence this week or next month, but it's something relevant. It's a mysterious part of the CRT that I didn't understand before. And look, I'm glad we got to talk about the DAG thing,
because I didn't even read that question.
Good stuff.
And I wasn't even like prepared for that, but thankfully I literally read, like last week I was researching DAG and like what it's doing, why is it did all that. I just literally read it, and so good timing.
Nice. All right, thanks. We'll stay on the line, Steve. But thank you very much to everyone for listening. We're going to be back next week. If you got your questions, stick them in the comments below. And again, you're already hearing a little bit. Try to give us a bit more info, whatever info that you feel is relevant.
Thank you, Lewis. You're the best.
Steve, thank you very much for your time today.
Bye.
All right. See you all next week. Bye-bye.